Oh, so you will take some leave?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
for how long?
As long as I can.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because,
To
oh, okay.
it's time to
Take a break, yeah, yeah.
get some sleeping for a bit before working.
Really? I mean, with the baby, I think that will be, oh, yeah, it's been like 5 years for me. I mean, my little one is 5 years old, and I remember which is mostly on and the nexus with critical minerals mining and processing. We got some projects from Department of Energy and Climate Change, also on hydrogen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we need to actually connect.
Yeah, because it's so funny how similar a lot of the work people do is, but we're just so siloed.
I know, yeah. So we are also under the College of Systems and Society, but previously we were in the College of Science.
Yeah, it's
Our school is mostly teaching on science communication, but I plan to actually develop a new course on energy communication.
Okay,
Yeah, so I need to talk a lot to people in your center.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Yeah.
A lot of us
Yeah.
lots of different things. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Sounds good. Sorry. Let me know if you can start.
Whenever you're we have three attendees online right now. We have three attendees online.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Yeah, maybe 2 more minutes. So this is like a very friendly session. It's a demo one.
Yeah.
So we start now. Okay. Welcome everyone to this Indonesia study group. So today's presentation will be by our esteemed guest, Anna Nadolny. Anna is a Senior Research Officer at the Center of Energy System under the College of Systems and Society. And my name is Rini Astuti. I'm a senior lecturer at the ANU Center for the Public Awareness of Science. And I'm pleased to chair this event today. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. And I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Just to note, today's event is a hybrid event, and we will be taking questions from those in the room and online. So for those online, you can write your questions in the Zoom questions and answers box, and we will read them out. So again, our speaker today is Anna Nadolny, and she has more than 10 years experiences in leading research on pumped hydro projects throughout Southeast Asia and South Asia. And she is with the Renewable Energy Group at ANU. So Anna's research analyzes energy systems and energy storage options. Those are very important issues in the age of energy transition. So at the end of Anna's presentation, we will manage Q&A with audiences. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite Anna for her presentation.
Thanks, Rini. Thank you, everyone. As mentioned, we've been working on pumped hydro in lots of different countries for many, many years now. We had the opportunity to work with PLN and the Ministry of Energy in Indonesia last year that culminated in this week-long site visit around the mountains in Bandung. So that's kind of the crux of the presentation. But I'll begin with some information about our group. So we've got quite a large group at the ANU Center for Energy Systems. We look at all different levels and aspects of the electricity system, right from the huge transmission lines down to distribution grids, keeping the system stable so as many people as possible can have rooftop solar. So we've got really broad experience at all levels of the electricity grid, and we're able to draw upon that. We also look at our keep our pumped hydro atlas up to date. I'm going to go into that in more detail soon. It's a big part of what we do. So we've had opportunities to travel around Southeast Asia, but also around Australia with different groups from, for example, Bhutan, Nepal, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia. And we talk about a few different aspects of the energy transition, obviously about the pumped hydro, but also about solar, of course, reoperating existing conventional hydropower so that it can support renewables. And even this is actually at a coal-fired power station near Lithgow, and even that is supporting renewables with upgrades that mean it can be ramped right down so that it doesn't take up too much capacity in the daytime. It can allow more solar to shine while still supporting it from an engineering perspective. So it's been really interesting work. It's all catalyzed by the fact that solar is so cheap now. It's so cheap and so deployable that it's far and away the most installed electricity generation source in the world. And we've also in Australia particularly learned a lot of lessons about making sure that a solar-based grid can be stable. It's by far and away, as I said, the most installed resource. Last year, or in 2024, more than 500 gigawatts was installed. As a comparison, Australia has about 50 gigawatts of generation capacity on the grid. So these are quite large numbers considering how much electricity we use per capita in Australia. And the good news is that, of course, Indonesia has also got a very good resource availability. To put it further into context, last year alone, globally, 800 gigawatts of solar and wind were installed. Again, mostly solar because wind is a bit more expensive and the location of the wind is a bit more difficult. So solar is just easier. So that 800 gigawatts in 1 year was equivalent to 15% of global gas generation all around the world that year. So if each year we're able to do this, we can be quickly replacing gas, replacing coal, moving to nice stable renewables. So this is looking at how many kilowatts of solar and wind have been installed per person in each country. So Australia is quite high with a lot of solar and wind. We're up there with other European countries that were early adopters of the technology, but also China, of course, the USA. So this kind of shows two things. Obviously, it shows that we consume a lot more electricity than some other countries, such as Indonesia, but also that these countries are showing the path forward as to how to integrate all of this intermittent solar and wind into the grid. So there are lots of examples of what to do and what not to do from these other countries that places such as India, Pakistan, the rest of ASEAN can learn from. Let's take a... The great thing about solar is that you can install it without losing any land whatsoever. And that's, of course, really important in these countries that have high density homes and also remnant rainforests that we don't want to be cutting down to replace with solar farms. In Australia, we have more than 1/3 of homes have got solar, about 4.4 million homes. It's really cheap energy. It's about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Not sure about you, but that's kind of 1/6 of my peak rates. So much, much cheaper than using the grid. When we do install solar farms, it is possible to still be using the land underneath the solar farms. Australia in particular has had great success with solar and sheep farms. So the sheep are protected because the fencing is better. The lambs don't get eaten by eagles as much or by foxes. The solar panels actually condense water down into the drip zone, which improves the pasture. Beneath the solar panels, you can kind of see the difference between the brown and the green. And because the weed control is better, the fleece is typically better. So farmers are really benefiting from being able to graze their sheep underneath the solar panels. And the solar farm owner does not have to pay for mowing of the grass, and then also problems such as the stones hitting the solar panels. Looking at Australia, if we were to convert to 100% renewables based on solar farms, wind farms, transmission and batteries and pumped hydro, the area it would take would be about 45 square meters per person, which it's not a huge amount. It could be less, it probably should be less. There are some ways in which using more energy doesn't actually improve standard of living. For example, if you're stuck in traffic for hours and hours. But these aren't huge numbers we're talking about, especially when we can be putting solar onto rooftops. So in Australia, we're heading towards having 82% renewables in the national electricity market by 2030. It's a bit up in the air as to whether we'll actually get there, but it's still getting pretty close. But the amazing thing is that about 10 years ago, we were at 85% fossil fuels. And so this transition is happening quite quickly, generally very well controlled. But it also means cheaper, cleaner electricity for everybody here.
Sorry, this is Australia.
This is Australia, yeah. This is Australia. There's other countries such as the US and EU are hoping for 100% either clean or renewable, plus or minus nuclear, by 2035-ish. So yeah, there's we're at the leading edge, I suppose. South Australia will get there probably next year or the year after to 100% renewables. So talking about the solar resource, you can see on this chart Australia and Indonesia. The first thing that people generally see with Australia is just how shockingly good it is in the middle of the country where not many people actually live. So it's good for some people, it might be good for industry, especially up here or close to Darwin, but it's actually here that the majority of the rooftop solar has been installed. And you can see the colours in Indonesia are very similar to these really good colours around Sydney. So even though Indonesia doesn't have the shocking, almost purple colour, it's got excellent solar for rooftop and utility farm. In some of the more mountainous areas, the solar is a bit closer to Tasmania, but there's still hundreds of thousands of people with solar in Tasmania and lots of successful solar farms. Just to give a more shocking comparison, in Germany, it's green. They've got pretty pathetic solar for many months of the year, as you'd expect from a wintry European country. But the thing is that they're still installing so much solar that they're able to hit 35% electricity generation just from solar in their best months. Obviously, things dive right down in winter time, but this is still working for them. They're able to sort their grid out around that. So it will be easier in Indonesia to be relying on the solar. Indonesia's also got another interesting advantage in that the lack of wind around the equatorial seas could actually mean that you could install floating solar. This technology has already been deployed around the world, and it will, of course, be easier to do this in the quieter seas around Indonesia than in, say, the North Sea around Europe. Indonesia already does have floating solar on inland lakes. We were able to visit one, and I'll talk about that later. But so taking advantage of all of these spaces that would not normally be used for electricity generation and that can have low impact on people and planet, just makes it easier to fit all of the solar in. So to think about some of the challenges Indonesia will face, I'll just mention some that Australia is facing. So this is the average over the last 28 full days on our electricity market here. You can see the demand curve is everything under the full curve. So demand drops a bit overnight. We have lots of solar during the middle of the day. We have our evening peak when people get home and turn on their heating, start doing their cooking, and it drops down again overnight. You can see just how much the coal is dropping down in the middle of the day, and everything is increasing into the morning peak and the evening peak because the electricity market rewards people for generating then because there's not so much solar available. So the important things really here are the hydro and the batteries. They're generating the morning, evening, and we've got batteries and pumped hydro soaking up electricity in the middle of the day. So we've got this lovely solar that's generating, but it needs to be used up or converted to storage when it's generated. The other things to note from the chart include just how long the winter solar nighttime is. We essentially need not just 2 or 3 hours of batteries to get through the night, but closer to 16 hours. We need this overnight energy plus the morning and evening peak. And we also need more energy at those times. And so the batteries and the pump hydro are really needed to get through those 16 hours as we start to see the coal-fired power stations shut down because of their age. The existing hydro has also become more flexible. So it used to be kind of close to base load, especially in Tasmania. But now you can really see the existing hydro turning on and off according to what the grid needs. In Australia, especially in Canberra, winter heating load is a real challenge. So our space heating, air conditioning, and also hot water. And it will be very interesting to see how that develops as gas appliances especially are decommissioned and turned off. Hot water heat pumps can work really well, especially if you in Canberra have got the really good quality ones that can actually work at low temperatures, such as Japanese ones. But if you have poorer quality ones, they can chew up a lot of electricity during winter time. So Indonesia will have some of these challenges, but especially not so much the winter heating challenge, which is wonderful for them. So now looking at the Indonesian power sector, you can see firstly that the biggest story from this is simply the sheer huge increase in electricity generation over the past 25 years. But Indonesia could still see, probably arguably should still see a large increase in energy consumption per person. There's still a long way to go before, say, reaching levels of energy use in Singapore. Probably a lot of appliances that people would appreciate having at home. And so that's the first part of the story, is how to generate all of this electricity in a way that's good for people and planet. The other big part of the story is just how much coal is available there. And if you have domestic coal, as we know in Australia, it's a great temptation for some people to use it. That's understandable, it's there. A lot of the problems with the coal are typically hidden from view, from immediate view. And if people need electricity, they need electricity. The interesting thing, though, is that solar is now cheap enough that it can replace coal for less money. The question is how to do the storage part of this. So some of the specific challenges for Indonesia would be how to power the export industries that have been developing. So a lot of the nickel processing is already powered with coal, particularly when there are geographical advantages to doing that, if the nickel deposits are close by to coal-fired power stations, things like that, or to coal reserves. There's also questions about what environmental restrictions are currently there and whether they need to be updated. Again, what source of electricity might be used for things like data centers, nickel processing, and also battery manufacturing, if that goes ahead in large quantities. Being made up of 17,000 islands, obviously, using undersea cables to connect the islands is quite expensive and also difficult to maintain. It's also important, if you do have undersea cables, to have more local generation and storage in case that there is an outage, and you need to generate locally to get through those outages. The seasonality of solar, to do with the wet season, could also be an interesting challenge. With some countries such as Vietnam have got the seasonality of solar, but they also have a lot of wind. And so that can be helpful in balancing things out over the year. Whereas without the wind in Indonesia, making sure that you've got a good suite of different generation and storage technologies to get through the wet season, it's a different challenge. It's still possible, it just might mean large spillage, we say, of solar. So in 2050 in Australia, our market operator is expecting us to generate an extra 20% of solar and wind. Just let it go. Don't worry about it. It's not worth building the storage to save it. But it's in Australia, we're thinking about all of this so differently because we're so far along the renewable energy curve that when you go to some countries and suggest just don't worry about the solar in the middle of the day, don't capture it all, it's a very different way to think about electricity. People are used to trying to harvest everything. And so that mindset shift can be a bit tricky. It will take some time to develop. But the other question is whether there are industries that can be turned on during the dry season and then switched off over the wet season. There might be things such as if electrolyzers get a lot cheaper, hydrogen generation, ammonia creation, things like that. So that's a wait and see kind of a proposition. So Indonesia is starting to move on these policies. There is about 1 gigawatt of solar in Indonesia now, but that will probably increase quite a bit in the future, not necessarily from rooftop solar. The rooftop solar policy is largely chosen or assigned by PLN, and there's currently a quota system that's in place. So the quota was set for 9 years of just 3 gigawatts. We install in Australia more than 3 gigawatts of rooftop solar a year. So just to give you that perspective of the size of this, the 2026 quota was already exhausted in April, with almost half again the number of megawatts on the waiting list. There is, especially in other countries, I've been told directly that there is tension when the utility on one hand is collecting money as funds, and especially as government funds for other areas as well. And so they don't necessarily want people to put rooftop solar on, because then they would not be paying for the electricity that they're using. The best example is Cambodia, where the government charge quite a hefty charge to factory owners who have solar on their factories, so that the total cost is the same as if they were using grid electricity. And on one hand, that's probably fine, because Cambodia does need more revenue, and these are foreign companies coming in and avoiding paying local electricity costs. But it does make things very difficult bureaucratically and lots of admin. The other thing is that PLN typically subsidize electricity costs, so the other benefits of going with rooftop solar are a bit more distorted, a bit more hidden. The other thing is that rooftops, about a third of them, I think, in Indonesia are asbestos, and that they're still being made and installed nowadays. So obviously, drilling into an asbestos roof is not great. That's a building problem that that we don't have to deal with, thankfully, because there's a lot of roofs that need to be reinstalled. The asbestos roofs can cope with the roof with the solar on top. It's just that question of human health, lung disease. So we can contrast this rooftop solar policy of 3 gigawatts over 9 years with this really recently announced microgrid and utility solar policy, where 100 gigawatts is planned for 3 years' time, which is just amazing. It'd be very interesting to see what happens. 80 gigawatts of that would be solar and batteries for island villages, for places that are not on the national grid, and then 20 gigawatts for utility solar on the national grid. So these isolated communities often have diesel generators. They're noisy, they're smelly, they cost a huge amount to run. And so this is the perfect opportunity to be putting solar and batteries in to replace that. There's about 17 gigawatts of that diesel power that would be excellent to be replaced. The diesel also costs PLN a lot more to generate, and they're obligated to sell at the same price to everybody. So this is a great spot to save a lot of money for PLN.
Sorry, what is BESS? Sorry.
Oh, BESS is battery energy storage system. Sorry about that. So this would be excellent for local communities. There are a lot of questions around maintenance. For example, in Western Australia, the power company, instead of having long transmission lines to certain farm properties, installed solar, batteries, diesel for certain farming properties. And a lot of them have been plagued with maintenance problems, with outages and things like that. I myself have lived on a rural property off grid with solar, battery, diesel for 2.5 years. And if you can become hyper aware because you don't want the diesel generator to go on, and it can be quite difficult even for somebody, a family who are all very aware of the electricity system. So this could be wonderful if things are sized well and if people are trained to do the maintenance to make sure things work out. But it could also not work quite so well if certain decisions are made. So again, really interesting to see what happens with this over the next 3 years. So this was directed more by the president rather than PLN. And very interesting to see how the policy forms. So before we jump into the storage itself, I just also wanted to highlight that pumped hydro and all general forms of storage have got benefits for fossil grids as well. So installing storage now, even when there is so much coal, is still useful. The very original pumped hydro was originally built to support coal and nuclear fired power stations because those older fired power stations preferred just to operate at a single level, not having to ramp up and ramp down according to the demand. So in the past, the pumped hydro would be pumping at night time and then generating in the middle of the day. And that's also why, especially say in Australia, we used to have our hot water systems always run overnight on the cheap off-peak rates so that the coal-fired power stations wouldn't have to change their generation profile. The other thing in Indonesia right now is that some of the contracts with coal-fired power stations and gas and even hydro are contracts where the operator says you have to take this electricity at certain times or pay for it. And if that take period doesn't line up with the good demand period on the grid, then that electricity can be lost and not paid for. So having the storage to be able to soak up that electricity and then use it another time is already useful. Okay, so on to energy storage. So there are lots of different technologies for energy storage. They each have got pros and cons, and we do need a suite of solutions rather than just a single solution. They all have different time frames as well, typically, and some of them even have quite specific geographical needs, such as compressed air energy storage. There's a compressed air energy storage that's going to be put into an old mine near Broken Hill. But those sorts of locations that have good competent rock to be able to store the pressurized air are not very common. Whereas, for example, we could have batteries everywhere on campus within fire safety limits, and that's fine and easy to do, but expensive. So for this presentation, obviously I'd be focusing on the pumped hydro, but Australia, Indonesia, everywhere will need a lot of the other ones as well. Pumped hydro is essentially a big water battery. So when there's extra electricity on the grid, we pump the water up the hill into the reservoir, and then when there's not enough electricity, we let it go back down again and generate electricity. There's about 20% electricity lost in this up and down movement, but that's especially when we're looking at a renewable grid, that's preferable to, say, installing more gas turbines or installing a huge amount more wind and solar and transmission lines to move everything around. The storage also provides some grid benefits that I've taken the slides out because I was told this was more of a social science audience. Yeah, so there's other benefits too, even beyond what we're talking about. So in the past, a lot of the hydropower that was installed was in massive river valleys. You can see that one in the top. This is an image from Tumut 3 in the Snowy Mountain scheme. You've got a river valley that was dammed with a 19-kilometre squared reservoir behind it. You can see there's only kind of short tunnels, 100 pipe penstocks, 150 meters. You can also see over in the distance much higher mountains. If they put the same kind of system into the much higher mountains, it would have been much longer penstocks but much smaller reservoir area. So you can do a lot more with a smaller amount of water if you have that big height difference between the two reservoirs. So that's where our pumped hydro atlas was formed with this realization that if you choose a good site, you can get a lot more bang for buck, have a much cheaper overall energy storage system, and a much smaller environmental footprint. So this example from China is more what we're picturing when we're talking about the pumped hydro. It's got 900 meters of elevation distance between the two reservoirs and much smaller reservoir overall, so that we're not taking away land from agriculture or moving villages. Yeah, as I said, far higher head options in the mountains above Tumut. So from that, we created the pumped hydro atlas by taking mapping data from all around the world. Every single one of these points is a possible pumped hydro scheme, and the colors represent different indicative costs. So the stars are the very cheap ones, the triangles are very cheap, and then yellow is the least good, but they might still be good depending on the location. You can see a lot of stars and triangles around Indonesia. There's lots of really good opportunities. There's in fact so many, there's too many to choose from, which is what our project was working on, was setting up a system with PLN and the Ministry of Energy to be able to choose what you would actually look at for an engineering project when faced with thousands of sites on the map. Snowy 2.0 is probably the biggest pumped hydro example going around the news right now. I won't go into all of the engineering details. I'll skip ahead to the cost because that's definitely the more controversial question. So originally, they said it would cost $2 billion. They had not done any digging. They had not checked what was underneath the ground. And they also took some plans from either the 70s or the 80s. And yes, so the price has been revised upwards and upwards and upwards. It still hasn't been announced yet what it will probably cost. I think the last official announcement was 16 billion. But if we do the calculations with 20 billion, it's still only $57 a kilowatt hour. To put that into context, the government's home battery scheme was giving people $252 a kilowatt hour, and then they would also be paying extra out of their own pocket for those batteries. So Snowy 2.0 on an energy basis is much cheaper than batteries for the foreseeable future. I obviously hope and pray that battery costs will come down even further, because that means quicker climate mitigation. But in the meantime, if we choose the right site, these can have really low costs. The other thing is that, so speaking to engineers in Australia building other pumped hydros, they say, oh, if this was India or Thailand, I'd be able to do it for a quarter of the price. The cement is so much cheaper, the labor laws are different, and so comparing prices in Australia and Southeast Asia can do it a lot cheaper. These assets also have 150-year lifetime, whereas batteries typically used to have warranties about 10 years. They're starting to talk about 20, even occasionally 30, but that still means having to recycle, refurbish battery stations again and again, compared to the much longer lifetimes of these assets. Assets in Tasmania that are more than 100 years old are still going strong and being upgraded, and in general, very good investments. The high sticker price is a bit difficult though. Of course, if you're building a single battery farm, it's probably going to be closer to 100, 200 million, because it's just so much smaller. Whereas bigger is better is typical with these pumped hydros. So just as a quick demonstration of what we want to be looking for in the pumped hydro plants, upper lower reservoir connected by a powerhouse with turbine generator. So the water capacity in the reservoirs is pretty much the energy capacity. So we want to be having as big an energy capacity as possible, but with as lower land use as possible. From E equals mgh, we have the energy stored is equal to the mass of the water times gravity times height. So if we can increase the height between the two, that's better. And if we have greater height, more energy per kilogram of water means smaller reservoir. So we can really minimize and shrink things down. And then the power capacity of the pump is mostly independent of the energy capacity. And for pumped hydro, power capacity costs more than for batteries. So it's better to have a system with big energy capacity in the pumped hydro, big power capacity in the batteries, and then having them work together rather than maxing out the power capacity on the pumped hydro. It's kind of what I just said. Each of course, again, has got the pros and cons. Pumped hydro can have really low cost, but typically you can't put one in the middle of the city, so you can't have it right there supporting the electricity grid. And batteries are the other way around, more expensive, but easier to locate. You can put them into transmission networks, you can put them into transformer areas so that you can avoid grid upgrades, but more expensive. So the project was taking all of this information and making it more simple for PLN and the Ministry of Energy to use. So we looked at our basic atlas, the physical and engineering geometry. We added in any mapping data that we could reliably get, geotechnical, natural hazards, problems with volcanoes and earthquakes in Indonesia, but also social and land use and environmental ecological values, and just where transmission lines were. We did this in several stages, which began mostly with the ANU side of things, but which had more and more input from the PLN and ministry colleagues as we went on, because it's the way it has to be, really, because they know what they're talking about on the ground. And so the idea was that ANU would provide this base of support as the project finished, but create something that was owned by PLN and the ministry. We started with all of the possible sites, more than 5,000 in the Jamali grid. So far too many to choose from. These were just the very best quality, lowest cost sites as well. There were 15,000 more Class A sites, so too many to choose from. We then put some strict technical requirements onto the sites, because if you can choose something that has good technical characteristics, it will have lower engineering risk. So we whittled down, we lost, say, 4,000 sites that way. And then we went through and we got rid of as many sites as possible based on mapping data. So looking at things like protected area. The normal atlas takes out any protected area that the UN has got defined, but we also included anything else that the Indonesian stakeholders wanted removed as well. The next question was, what should be a hard constraint? What do you definitely not flood or move, versus what could be mitigated? So this was a difficult question, and one that we posed to our Indonesian colleagues rather than answer ourselves. Yeah, there were some interesting conversations around that. The types of constraints that we were looking at and had data for were things like the location of rice paddies, mangroves, human settlement, forest cultural heritage, peatland biodiversity, and then some more natural hazard risks. And typically we decided to keep most things as soft constraints and just flag them rather than remove everything. Just a little thought experiment. At what point, obviously we don't want to have to move anybody for a pumped hydro installation, and there are cases where you do not have to move any houses. But at what point are there too many people in those situations? Was something that we spoke about a lot. The reason being that imagine there was a city with 70,000 people who lived in this location. At some point it becomes inappropriate to build something there. 70,000 is important because we visited one of the hydro sites built 30 years ago where they had moved 70,000 people. We visited another one where they had moved 30,000 people. So it was really refreshing and excellent to hear the colleagues from Indonesia talking about not wanting to move anybody. Just wonderful how far that idea had come, especially given that's not the state in other countries that we've been working in as well. So we created a spreadsheet that was nice and user-friendly to use for our colleagues, and also editable so that they could change the inputs and the settings, whether depending on the island that they're looking at or any other factors. So then the site visit itself was to pressure test the spreadsheet. So we went to some really good sites and some terrible sites just to make sure that everything lined up with the spreadsheets. So the biggest problem with the ground truthing was the road access, because obviously we couldn't go anywhere where there was no road, but the places where there was no road were always the best pumped hydro sites because you didn't have to move any people, whereas all of the locations that were accessible were probably going to be impossible to build on because there was a long history of people living there. On the first day, we visited Sarada Reservoir, which is an existing conventional hydropower plant with the floating solar on top. We were also able to visit Seguling, which is 423 meters higher up, another existing hydropower plant. So this would essentially be a Snowy 2.0 kind of project for Indonesia, except Snowy 2.0 has got 27 kilometers of tunnel between the two reservoirs, and this would only be about 11.6 kilometers. So already that engineering risk is a lot lower. It's also probably easier to do penstocks, so pipes above the ground in Indonesia. Of course, need to do a lot of checks about seismicity before going ahead, so that would be the next stage. But this was an excellent project. It would be about half the energy capacity of Snowy 2.0, but again, this was before proper studies, so it could get bigger, it could be smaller. Both water reservoirs are already being used for electricity, so moving to pumped hydro is not as big a change as, say, if it were for water irrigation or fisheries. The other interesting thing about these two sites was the water level change when going to pumped hydro with the pumping and the this and the that would actually be less than what they're seeing now with their conventional hydro, because when they're letting the water go down their existing generators, they're just losing meters and meters of water. And so the local fishery people, particularly in Sarada, would probably be less affected by moving to pumped hydro than continuing as they're doing now. The other thing is that both reservoirs are going to be, Sarada already has the floating solar, yep, and Seguling will have it eventually. So these are all essentially a renewable energy zone that's being formed. So that, yeah, this conventional dam displaced 56,000 people from 1984. There's a lot of people who depend upon it now, whether for electricity generation or for fisheries. The floating solar is quite good for the fish because it gives them more protection from predators. And so we weren't able to confirm this in Indonesia with the local fishermen, but in Thailand, the fishermen have had better catches since having the floating solar. So this could be an excellent example of a pumped hydro that would not require any people to be moved and would in fact probably lead to good outcomes for the water consumption within these two existing reservoirs. How am I going for time? Okay, I think we're good. So the other thing is that if we can change the way that the hydropower stations are being used, because these hydropower stations would still be accessible and usable even with the pumped hydro, then you can support even more renewables than just with the pumped hydro by itself. So we already touched on this, that in Australia, our existing hydro has all changed. But depending on the water fluctuations and flows in Sarada and Seguling, you could also see the same kind of generation pattern of moving into the morning and evening peaks as we're already seeing in Australia. So that would mean that the existing hydropower becomes more valuable at those certain times of days and can help the whole system to support more renewables. So that's something else that we spoke about in detail with our colleagues, because we don't want to see pumped hydro being built just for the sake of it. We want to see all of the assets being redeployed in ways that support more solar. So jumping ahead to day 3, and we saw a site that would require 2 new reservoirs to be built. It would have the same kind of energy capacity, 150 gigawatt hours. But this one had a lot of people and a lot of farms that would need to be moved. The interesting thing about this one was the ownership of the land was a centralized ownership, and then the farms were rented out to the different people living there. But it was good to calibrate with our spreadsheet because it said that the risk was quite high, and it was. Again, this was because we had to drive there. We then were comparing to another set of sites on the map that were a good 10-kilometer walk through jungle. And that would be fine because you would not be moving any people. But yes, it's actually seeing things that could be made was quite difficult because of the road access. We then finished the day with the Upper Sosokan pumped hydro construction, which is a pumped hydro that's being built in Indonesia. It will have 8 gigawatt hours of energy storage. So a different scale to the other ones we've been looking at, but it's the first project being built and is an excellent learning opportunity. So I think this was the lower reservoir wall, looking down the 100-meter escarpment where they've been putting in the landslide protection, and compared to the scale model of what the site would be like. The major difference between this and the kinds of pumped hydro that we typically would be looking at is that they had a waterway moving through it. So that meant that you needed to have access for the water to leave the dam without going through the pumps and turbines, which adds engineering complexity to the work, but was interesting for us to see in any case. This was also really good for the to give the scale of the size of these walls that we're talking about to the PLN and Ministry of Energy colleagues. So to conclude a bit abruptly, Indonesia has got wonderful solar that can be utilized, but that challenge lies in turning the solar into electricity that can be relied upon all day and all night. So pumped hydro plays a key role with batteries. And if we can choose the best sites possible, it should mean a cheaper electricity system, more affordable for everybody. An early deployment of the pumped hydro means faster uptake of the solar, because the grid operators know that they can rely on the pumped hydro to fix the engineering problems that can happen if you've got too much solar too quickly. And finally, Java Island had many excellent sites, and more than would be needed for 100% renewables. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was an excellent presentation. I learned a lot, actually. It's actually my first time knowing that we do have a floating solar panel in Indonesia. Okay, so we're open for questions from the audiences online. There is one question. Okay, and we'll open for online audience first. Chacha, you want to read it?
Yes. So one question from Ross McLeod. What was the meaning of the 350 gigawatt per hours in the Snowy 2 cost exercise? Is this total electricity produced in a year over the 100-year life? How is it calculated?
It's the total energy capacity within, if the upper dam were full, it can generate 350 gigawatt hours, probably over 7 days or so. So the idea would be with Snowy 2.0, it would probably only empty fully a few times in winter in Australia. Other times it might cycle a few gigawatt hours. So it would probably overall use generate a lot more than just the 350 gigawatt hours a year.
All right. Is that clear for Ross? Is there any follow-up from Ross? Okay, Good. All right. I see Pak Budi.
Thank you for a nice presentation and a clear presentation. So I have several small questions. Number one, on floating solar, how much it is more expensive if we build it on the sea rather than inland like in Chirata? Will the cost be significantly different or not? Second, so it is interesting that the idea of combining hydro farm and hydropower in Chirata, but will having a hydro power in will that increasing the risk of effectiveness of the hydropower, because hydropower you release the water, and so during dry season it's actually making it the water for the upstream and downstream is not stable. If it is only hydro pump, it's more stable.
Yeah, you would need to be very careful with the contractual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And number three is that a telecommunication company in Indonesia has been laying a fiber optic on the sea. You know, like Java, Bali is relatively full of fiber optic. How much more expensive is electric cable DC compared to this optic? Do you know roughly?
I'll start with the offshore solar would be significantly more expensive. I don't have specific numbers on hand, but the salty environment is just a lot more difficult to deal with. I can follow up and send more details if you'd like. That question about the hydro and the pumped hydro is a really good one, and one that we spoke about on site as well, because Seguling in particular had some dry seasons where they had run out of water essentially. But if you've got the solar during the day, then you can be pushing back the hydro, you can be limiting the hydro use for longer and longer, and so you can help to get through those drought situations. So even just installing more solar means that you've got more water to play with. And then things do get more complicated when you've got the pumped hydro as well. So on one hand, you could be allowing the water release from Seguling and then pumping water back up from Serrata. Probably not quite at the same time, but in order to refill Seguling a little bit. But the major improvement will come from the solar displacing the need for the hydro. I think I have this written down somewhere that Seguling was being used almost as base load. One of the two were being used as almost base load, and it was Seguling because Serrata was being used for the peaking energy for morning and evening and the middle of the day. So you could see a very different profile for those plants if you had the solar in that location, especially for Serrata. It was quite eerie seeing hydro being used in the middle of the day instead of solar, just coming from the Australian background. And then the third question, I don't have numbers for the costs for optical fibers versus undersea cables. Perhaps if this Singaporean to Australia connection goes ahead, the costs for HVDC cables might come down a lot. I guess it's a wait and see kind of a thing. But again, I can follow up with some numbers if you'd like.
Yeah, because it is unavoidable, isn't it, for Indonesia to have this water problem, because a lot of the pump are in Kalimantan, bigger island.
Yeah,
less people over there.
Yeah, I think there is one being built between Java and Sumatra. I don't have more details of that right now though. But it is possible to do each island individually. It's just a question of how much overbuild in the solar and the batteries to do.
sorry, Mr. Yes.
Tom Worthington from the
Yes.
School of Computing. Just to answer that last question, the electric undersea cable is about 20 times the price of fibre optics, because the optical cable is only a tiny little thing and the electric cable is a big chunk of metal. Just a question on something that hasn't happened in Australia yet, so maybe we don't have to listen. Will the prevalence of electric vehicles have an effect in terms of providing a effectively subsidised source of batteries which can be used?
It's an interesting question. So, because electric vehicles not only have all of the electricity problems, but also have the personal ownership problems of cars. So, there's kind of a hierarchy of easiness of integrating them into the grid. The first one being the idea that the homeowner goes home, plugs it in, and then the electricity company turns off the charging according to the need on the grid. So that's what we have at our home. We only pay 8 cents a kilowatt hour, but the electricity company can turn that off whenever they want, according to what the grid needs. Usually it's only 4 hours a day or so that's fine for us. We can also override it and charge for full cost if we really, really need to. So that's demand charging. The next level would be actually using the electricity from the battery itself. So vehicle to load or vehicle to house or vehicle to grid. And that is starting to happen. There are trials, particularly with the Amber Electric retailer. Those trials are being coordinated with the car companies themselves because of that question about the warranty of the battery. So some car companies are happy to include the vehicle to grid usage within their warranty conditions. Some, like Tesla, are not happy to at all. Understandable, given that they have an energy storage product they also want to be selling. So yeah, that is starting to happen. It's an interesting question. The costs of the vehicle to grid compatible chargers are also a lot higher than just a plain one-way charger. I've seen figures like $10,000 instead of $1,000. And so that will probably be, again, an early adopter kind of a technology. It will also require very good understanding of kilowatts and kilowatt hours and impacts on range. So it might only appeal to a certain proportion of the population. Having said all of that, if all of the cars and trucks in Australia are changed over to electric, that does represent a very large amount of energy storage. Private cars are the most inefficient form of personal mobility. They're parked 95% of the time, so are a good candidate for pulling electricity out when the grid needs. But yeah, all tied up with the fact that we've got car parks all here, but none of them have got even a 10 amp power plug, let alone a DC compatible one. So there would need to be a lot of, depending on the time of day that the electricity is needed, there'd probably need to be a lot of changes to the system. All of which is to say, who knows, could work or it could be terrible.
Before we go to Pak Archo, there is one question online.
Questions from Johannes Tanutama. For every 1 gigawatt hours of pumped hydro storage, how much solar is ideally needed so the system works efficiently? And the larger the system, the lower the cost. What is the cost per kilowatt hours for 10 gigawatt hours versus 1 gigawatt hours or other scales? Any rule of thumb? Thank you.
The answer to both is that it depends. So we have energy modeling software that takes at least 10 years of historical data for solar and wind resource for different locations, and then calculates exactly how many gigawatts of wind and solar and gigawatt hours of pumped hydro you'd need to run the grid. So when we do that for Australia, it comes out as being about 1.3 terawatt hours of storage. So that doesn't necessarily all need to be from pumped hydro. When we did that for the Jamali system, I think it came out as being the optimum was about 8 terawatt hours, but the range could be extended from 5 to 25, depending on the other technologies. Yeah, it's a bit hard to say for a full-scale grid. In terms of the cost for the technologies, the pumped hydro is very, very site-specific. But if you go to the atlas, then you can see the different indicative costs. And I think we have up on the website the cost per kilowatt and the cost per kilowatt hour that are the cutoff points for those different size sites, different class sites. And so you can kind of get a rough feeling for that. Of course, these are indicative costs, and it depends on what's under the ground as to extra engineering costs and things like that.
Thank you. Pak Anchok.
Thank you for the presentation. From your interaction with them, and you get a sense of their big plan in terms of this energy transition. For example, supposedly their objective to put on the solar panel, or is it for smooth the transition, or so we don't waste coal abruptly, or what is like their objective?
It's a very interesting question, and to be honest, they kept their cards close to their chest. And we were speaking to quite a small group because we were going from Bandung office, and we kind of had two or three different groups from different areas, but it was mostly just the pumped hydro discussion rather than wanting a lot more solar. So there were other promising factors, such as a study tour to Australia to some of the coal-fired power stations that do the ramping up and down that some people had been on a few months before, and more continued interactions around those sorts of things. But no, I did not get a very good
Insight on the political side of the studies.
Thanks, Emma. Most of your site analysis seems to have focused on Java, I guess, maybe Kalimantan. I assume Sumatra. I'm just wondering about other parts of Indonesia further to the east, where the population is smaller and perhaps the demand is less, but still there must be some gradations in gradient, or some variations in gradient that would be good for pumped hydro. I was just wondering whether you've been thinking about that.
Yeah, we had to focus on Java because that was where we could physically go and look, and so but there are lots of options on the other islands. I don't have a close-up view, but the atlas does. That's right. The atlas does have a lot of options on Sulawesi and Maluku, and in fact, a lot of the locations where the captive coal-fired power stations are supporting industry do have these options. It's also possible to build pumped hydro into old mining sites. Coal is a bit difficult because coal in its very nature is a bit unstable, and so you can't just put heavy things on top of it and hope that it won't move. Gold mines are better, but it is possible to take that degraded land or to take cooling water catchments and turn them into pumped hydro. So that there might also be not an easy opportunity, but an opportunity of repurposing that infrastructure to still be able to generate electricity in those locations for those industries.
Yeah, one question I forgot to ask. People also talk about this, the waste of solar panel and after 10 years, how big and also batteries. Would you think that that would be a problematic if Java is pushed into 100% renewable?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. It's very topical. Right now, the Australian Parliament is doing I think a Senate inquiry into solar panel waste. So I have the numbers off the top of my head. Firstly, though, the oldest solar panel that's still working is 55 years old in Germany. So this is a really nice technology in that it doesn't really have moving parts. So the inverter might need to be replaced. Inverters in Australia are typically sold with a 10-year warranty, whereas the panels themselves, 25 years. Obviously, we've just had a lot of development in solar over the past 20 years. And so if somebody, I've got a nice photo of my parents' 2 solar arrays where one is quite big and generates something 1.5 kilowatts. The other one is quite small and generates 5 kilowatts because the technology has improved so much over the years. And so you're able to fit a lot more wattage into a single panel. So that means that in Australia, you've got this perverse incentive where people pull the old solar panels off and replace them because they can generate a lot more on their rooftop with the same area. But that continuous improvement might not continue to happen. And so maybe this is a good time for Indonesia to start putting in the solar panels and not feeling that need to replace them in 10 years' time. So that's my initial thoughts. In terms of the waste itself, Andrew's just spoke to the inquiry and pointed out that each year from 2050, the solar panel waste will be about 16 kilograms per person per year. And if you compare that to sewage, it's closer to 160 kilograms, and then to general refuse again, it's an even larger number.
Is that in
in Australia?
Oh, interesting.
So the waste itself has got the aluminium frame you can just rip off and recycle. The silicon, it's a bit, and the glass is a bit trickier because the whole point of the solar panel is that you want it to last for as long as possible. So it's bonded together really nicely and is hard to take apart. It does also have silver and copper in it, which is desirable to reuse, especially as prices go up and up and up. So it's a difficult area, especially because a lot of the solar panels that are finding their way to the rubbish tip are probably still okay to use. There's a really great group in not Fishwick, the other Mitchell, I think, called PV Lab, who take these secondhand solar panels and test them and then certify them so that they can be reused. But solar can be very dangerous. It's electricity, and so there's a difficult balance between having a safe secondhand market and having people electrocute themselves. So ideally, we would be leaving them on the roof for longer, and then testing them, and then recycling as needed after reusing. It'd be interesting to see how things go.
Because you mentioned that for Australia to have 100% renewable solar is 45 meters square.
That was with the pumped hydro as well.
Yeah.
So I think that the solar itself is closer to 15.
Yeah, because if you compare that to Indonesian situation, 45 meters square is quite big. I mean, in Jakarta, for example, a lot of people live in the area particularly if they stay in, there's a term, peta, they are about like 9 square meters.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so that is, yeah.
If they don't have the winter heating load though, then it can be easier. And also if they have excellent facilities like the Whoosh train, if they
Yeah.
have more high-speed rail moving people instead of inefficient private cars,
Yeah.
more public transport, then we can get that number down. So in Australia, we use about 10 megawatt hours per person per year. Whereas in, I think, Denmark, it's closer to 6 megawatt hours per person per year because of the better transport policies. So, yeah, there are lots of questions that go into energy consumption. And yeah, minimizing energy consumption is key, is very, very helpful to all of this. Energy efficiency should be the first fuel that people look at. But there's also a question of just not wanting to rock the boat and saying, okay, look, if we're just replacing everything, this is how much it would be. It's not that much. Let's just get on and do it. Yeah.
We have one more question online. Yeah.
A follow-up question from Pat Ross. Have I got this right? If the new Snowy 2 storage dam was full, hypothetically, you could generate 350 gigawatt hours of electricity by using up the full amount of water. And this would take roughly 7 days?
Definitely yes to the first part. Approximately yes to the second part. I need to just sit down with a calculator to double check that. But yeah.
Just a quick question in terms of a follow-up from this study. I mean, what is in parents' mind? Are they like thinking about really having that investment in pump hydro these coming years, or it's more about evaluating the option pump hydro versus others? And are they only looking at Java in terms of potential sites?
So they were already looking at a site in Sumatra for feasibility studies. So there's definitely interest in pumped hydro and continuing this. The Sarada Suguling one was really popular as well. So the only complicating thing, I suppose, is that 100 gigawatt policy had just been announced and it was taking up a lot of headspace. So yeah, I can't say for sure where people's focus was lying, but there was interest in more pumped hydro.
Do you know why the 100 gigawatt policy like suddenly changed, like from the quota of 9 gigawatt for 3 years suddenly to 100 gigawatt? What's the motivation behind that?
I have heard discussions about it being to do with Modi's India policy, where he announced a huge amount of gigawatts of solar. But I can't.
With India?
For India, yeah. So, but I'm not sure where the president had what caused the president to make this decision.
No one knows. Right, but I have the last question. So it was great to hear that PLN actually thinking that, oh, we don't want to move or people or move villages. So that's great. So that's a very good improvement from the new order, I guess. And looking into the data that the ANU team used to overlay the potential location for the pump hydro, there is the indigenous land using the DESA map and the PRWA map. Is that coming from ANU team or from PLN?
That was from PLN.
Oh, wow, that's great, yeah.
Although it was probably through the consultants. So I'm not sure if PLN provided it to the consultants and then to us, or if the consultants got it from somewhere else and gave it to us. There were, yeah.
Yeah, that's really great to know that the PRWA data is being used there, because so far I think the customary of the indigenous land map is not clear yet, but that the government, I mean PLN, is using that. That's great. Yeah. Is there any more question? If not, please give a round of applause to Anna for the parental leave in October. Hopefully, you will get a lot of rest. Hopefully.
I'll get my lungs back at least.
That was great. Thank you